This is Geek Gab with your hosts, Dornall and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Saturday, June 25th, 2022. Dornall, how was your week?
Hey, Daddy Warpig. My week was pretty slow on account of my allergies going into overdrive. Once again, I've spent most of it working and sleeping. That's it. That's the show.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for
Uh,
coming in, folks.
yeah. Well, geek-wise, I've been, I've still been catching up on The Expanse. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Um, Writing really dropped off in season 4. Um, but there's enough good moments in each episode and cool science fiction visuals that I'm gonna continue to watch it.
Is season 4 the season where they stopped paying attention to the alien stuff and just became all about the politics?
Yeah,
Yeah, that season
yeah.
I didn't like that much. That wasn't good.
They and also the characters because they've got this broad cast of characters and because of all the drama, the things that are happening with those characters, and you may grow to like or care some of them, but because all of them are involved in all sorts of these different storylines, you get each set of characters gets their dramatic moments in each episode, and often it's sort of like a sad or bittersweet or maudlin sort of scene, and they'll just string two or three of those together. Um, Between season 4 and season 5, and in season 5 is the one where they just decide to split the whole cast and have them all off doing different things. So instead of an A story, a B story, a C story, you've got sort of co-equal A, B, C, D stories that they don't intersect until late in the season. I'm not a fan of the writing in these two seasons, though. Some of the stuff that happens, like I said, it's still interesting enough. Plus, there's that Amos character. He's still on the show, so
He's always awesome. I like him.
yeah,
He's the best part of the show.
absolutely.
Speaking of poorly written shows, guess what just came out with its last episode this week? You don't
Well,
told.
I can't guess. I'm going to recuse myself from this game because you told me before the show.
Yeah. Kenobi had its last episode. There were only 6 of them come out this week, and I watched it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So the audience is sitting there thinking, saying, verily screaming at the device of their choice, uh, "Don't keep us in, don't keep us in suspense anymore. Tell us whether the show is worth watching." And I would say, no, I cannot give Kenobi a recommend. It is, it is not worth watching. There
Good.
are some okay moments in the show, and there is even some good performances by people in the show, but it's just not worth 6 hours of your life.
Yeah. Matthew Martin in the chat. Hey, what's up? He wants to know why you keep doing this for yourself. It's for the show, I guess. We do this
Yeah,
for
it's my
you.
job. I mean, I don't have to watch everything. Their Miss Marvel started this week.
What?
Yeah, I haven't watched that. I am kind of curious.
It's like this. It's like this weird echo where in terms of the cultural zeitgeist, superheroes appear to be over, but the producers don't know it yet.
Mm.
Um, it's a Disney Plus series. It's not a movie, It's a Disney Plus series, and it just started on Disney Plus, so it's going to be releasing episodes for, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks, whatever. But the character is dreadfully unpopular on the in comics, dreadfully boring. And even though they changed all her powers to make her actually a better character, that is, by the way, the absolutely, faintest of praise I can give it. They are making her slightly less garbage for the show in terms of her power set. Because her other power set was, and get this is how exciting her powers were for the comic. Her hands inflated like balloons so she could punch people with them.
Wow.
That's it.
And she's stretched too, right? Like a Mr. Fantastic or Plastic
stretched.
Man.
So yeah, not even as much as Mr. Fantastic. Mr. Fantastic from like 1963 was already a better Miss Marvel than Miss Marvel was.
That's absurd.
It is. It's totally absurd. And the story behind the character is that, like, Sana Amanat, I want to get the name mostly right, was an aide to Hillary Clinton. And under suspicious circumstances, no one's been able to fully unearth, she got a job at Marvel Comics with the avowed intent of increasing representation at the comic company, introducing new minority characters and things like that, and representation and all of that.
Oh, sure, yeah. That's all over corporate America.
It's all very mysterious, and no one's been able to find out exactly who her family is, but her family has ties to the Clintons and bundled a lot of money and is very rich. But it's all mysterious and all shrouded, and it's really hard to get information about them and all of this. And it's just really puzzling. So she is a Pakistani American, and I mean Miss Amanat. And so she creates a comic book character who is, and wait for the punchline, Pakistani American.
Oh wow, it's just like me. Representation matters.
Who gets transformed by the Terrigen mists, because this was happening during the time when Fox held the right to the X-Men, and they were trying to erase the X-Men from the Marvel Universe so they could instead go with Inhumans, who are a different kind of people who were completely different than X-Men, only they were exactly like mutants. And the Terrigen mists had gotten spread across the planet, so a bunch of new people were popping up who were completely different than mutants, but exactly like mutants anyway. And so she became a character. She had the ugliest costume in the world that only had the benefit of being really easy to duplicate in cosplay. Like, it was dead simple. You had like this smock and tennis shoes, sneakers, or high tops, and leggings, and some kind of head thing. I can't remember what it is. I can't picture it. I've seen it, a couple dozen times. I can't picture it right now. I wasn't really preparing to do this. It just occurred to me. Anyways, terribly unpopular character with a terribly lame power set that no one in the world would ever want. This isn't the kind of character people look up to and want to be. people look up to Batman because Batman is badass. And you would want to be Batman. And people look up to Superman because he's got all the powers that would be awesome. He's super strong, super resilient. He can fly. People look up to like Spider-Man because he's neat. He's got neat powers. He can swing from buildings, and he's a smart aleck, and he's funny. And people would like to be that. Or Captain America because he's heroic and he's strong and he slings that shield around. But no one wants to have big, goofy hands that puff up. Except for that psychopath who draws the blue bear. And that's for completely different reasons.
Holy cow. That's the second time I've been transported to 2014. We already did that once in the green room.
Oh.
Who is going to get that reference? I'm going to watch the chat. Sorry, I couldn't let that reference go. All right. Hey, I want to jump
too long.
I want to jump on and talk back to chat here, where we're talking about superheroes will never be over. Superhero as a genre in and of itself is likely over, and I want to address that and follow it up with video Mirador. I don't know. Hey, you're always on the show. I have no idea how to say your username. Video Mirador. Video Mirador. Yeah, I want to see other genres like noir, action, adventures, and so on. I want to express the idea that the superheroes are characters and they're part of the story, but they're not the genre in and of itself. The superhero origin story might be a genre, but you can film a noir movie using superhero characters. Many superhero movies some of the television shows are like soap operas, and some of them are like action adventures. And the best ones or the worst ones. What was the Civil War, Captain America Civil War? That was basically just Jon Favreau bringing out all his plastic superhero toys and smashing them against each other on his desk, right? It's just let's have all the heroes fight each other, right?
Which was great.
It's kind of what everybody signed up to see. So keep that in mind. Like, it's not the superheroes are just done. Everybody's sick of them, and I think the superhero origin story has been done to death, and I don't think we need to see another one of those. But we could have all those different stories with superheroes, and I'm saying we're done with superheroes. Let's go back to telling these traditional types of stories with other characters.
So
anyway, you may think of that as a distinction without a difference, but whatever.
They changed her powers for the show because she had really lame powers, and now she has apparently, and I'm saying this, from what I've seen in the trailer, she actually has not lame powers. So they made the character better. Who knew? But hey, we have a perfect hook to get our guest in. Oh, so Kenobi, bad. Don't see it. Don't waste 6 hours of your life. I'm not recommending going and seeing Miss Marvel because I haven't watched it. And I don't know. Anyways, our guest.
What's the segue? Our guest is a superhero.
Our guest just did a Kickstarter, both for a superhero role-playing game and for a graphic novel set in the same superhero universe, which I have.
That's right, I did.
Alexander Macris. We had a guest on a couple of weeks ago who told me how to pronounce it. Otherwise, I would have just completely not.
It rhymes with peace, not with piss.
There you have it. That's in my notes now, show notes.
And I believe it's called the Ascendant Universe.
That's right. Ascendant Universe, and the graphic novel is Ascendant Star Spangled Squadron.
So, you see the segue there, John, is from superheroes to superheroes.
Yeah, I picked it up. I picked it up on that. Yeah.
Yeah, John, I hope you're wrong that superheroes are over, because I just launched a superhero brand. That said, it's definitely more of a reconstruction of superheroes, with more classical tales. So to the extent that what has turned people off about contemporary superhero storytelling is the subversion of the tropes that they like, hopefully they will find that Ascendant doesn't subvert their expectations. It meets and exceeds their expectations.
Oh, that's great to hear. I'm going to share the Kickstarter right now for everybody watching on YouTube. So this was completed.
Yes, yes. This was complete. This was last year's Kickstarter for the game, and earlier this year was an Indiegogo for the graphic novel.
I think there's no maybe the cultural zeitgeist superheroes are waning, but in gaming, they're one of the things that can't be beat. Between that and fantasy, high fantasy, those are the two big games. And if you've listened to me long enough on the podcast, I feel the same way about the current iteration of the Dragon game, which is simply a superhero game with fantasy trappings, with a shallow veneer of early 2000s Seattle on it. Superheroes are a great vehicle for tabletop gaming. So, Daddy Warpig, you said you got these?
I got the comic. I could not buy into the Ascendant role-playing game when it was live. I was poor and could not afford it.
Yeah. It's definitely been a difficult fundraising environment because of the economy being in the shitter. I've had a lot of backers have reached me and said, I'm going to support, but I can't do as big as I did in 2018 or 2017. So I think it's a lot of hard times. But thank you for jumping in on the graphic novel. There's going to be another crowdfunding campaign for Ascendant Rogues Gallery either later this year or early next year, which is going to be a supplement for Ascendant filled with dozens of new characters and templates and things like that. We've also got an adventure series called the Capital City Case Files coming out, which is going to be a whole set of one-off campaign games that you can play set in our fictional capital city, Delaware, designed for X-Man level superheroes, city level Spider-Man superheroes, and then there's going to be sequels to the graphic novel as well. So it's a big push for me. So I'm really counting on John being wrong on this, and superheroes are about to have the new dawn, hopefully, maybe.
Well, I've never been wrong before, so about anything. So we're in.
That's troublesome. That's troublesome.
All right, so we're gonna have to work against my no. In all seriousness, well, this is something that is sort of this was a surprise to me because I only obliquely follow some of the stuff you've put out. I'm definitely a person that stopped buying a lot of role playing stuff years and years ago, and you sort of, from my perspective, you made your bones with Adventure Conqueror King system.
Right.
So I was surprised to find out that you were launching a superhero game, and I haven't checked it out yet because actually I don't play superhero role playing games. I should probably change that, but there are only so many hours in a week.
It's true. So when I was working on Axe, I ended up kind of evolving into this niche where people really liked the level of detailed simulation I put into politics, economics, world building, the environment, etc. And so I had this notion of, could I take simulational game design to the next level and create a physics-based superhero RPG using logarithmic math? And I didn't really expect it to be as popular as it was. It ended up being #1 on Drive Thru RPG, and it sat on the charts for 3 months. Outsold Axe, and quite surprised me. And I'm still not sure if it's because people just really like the art and the vibe, or if it's because the market for crunchy games is bigger than people think it is, and we're misled by the indie movement and rules lightness, and there's actually an untapped audience for crunch. So we'll find out more when I release Rogues Gallery and some other stuff like that. So.
Oh, cool. I should definitely take a closer look. And yeah, I think you're right. I think there's there's things like there is a little bit of appetite for a little more crunch in the games, uh, because there's a lot of people who do play the rules light and that sort of thing. And after a few hours of rules light gaming, it's all empty calories. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel like you're playing a game. It can be a great diversion.
I agree with you. In fact, in my book, Arbiter of Worlds, I make a comment that a rules light game is a game that just hasn't been played enough. Because any rules light game that's played in a long-term campaign ends up becoming rules heavy. It's exactly what happened to original Dungeons and Dragons.
I can give a big recommend to that. I have read Arbiter of Worlds. I thought that was a nice a nice introduction to the way that you understand role-playing games and tabletop role-playing games. And for a lot of people, and it does apply to a lot of people in that sort of OSR old school milieu. And so I thought that was really fascinating. Do you have a one-line summary of what your thoughts on what tabletop gaming is?
One line. I think tabletop role-playing games should be focused on giving players agency through their characters in a world in motion.
I'm going to clip that later.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's very much at odds with the contemporary philosophy that tabletop role-playing games are about making stories with friends. And I think there's a place for story games. I just think they're a different genre than tabletop role-playing games. So.
Yeah, I think I've played with just a couple of personal anecdotes. I've played with people where if you play with a group of friends and there's a very high level of trust, that you can go outside the rule system, make something up, and the game master will get a twinkle in his eye and say, okay, let's run with that, right? And that's how story games develop. And that can be very fun and rewarding. But I've also had the task lately. I've been investigating what modern games have to offer, in considering both, in two scenarios, considering starting a new game myself, learning a new game and playing it, something like Adventure Conqueror King, or just go to an old game that I've never played before, as well as the research into an upcoming role-playing game, doing play testing for that, and doing market research or competitor research on, okay, what do other games in this style do? And what can I say? They're all the same. That all the games have a global, universal resolution mechanic, and they all say the same thing in the what is a role-playing game section. They all say roughly the same thing in the character creation section and how to play section and that sort of thing. There are almost no rules for the game master. The game master's told to just make it all up. Like you do all the work. We just copy pasted the tried and true universal mechanic system that we've been using since GURPS, only slightly modified. And you can tell they're just there to sell the paper, or they're just there to sell the books, right? There's no meat in there for anybody who's ever played before. Which I can't speak for Ascendant, but I can speak for Axe. Axe, there's plenty of meat there, and you started with Beckme, you started with as a sort of a
Mm-hmm.
starting place. So you actually had some bones to build on top of. But like, there's a game there.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, my games are very meaty, I would say. Ascendant has, Ascendant is a 496-page rulebook, and it uses a very carefully built mathematical model that lets you simulate virtually anything. So it has rules for volcanoes, it has rules for fighting disease pandemics, investigating crime scenes, talking to witnesses, stopping a tsunami, diverting an asteroid, like almost anything you can think of that a superhero could do, we have mechanics for. And it uses a universal resolution system, which is very simple. But because of that, it's able to be really modular with all sorts of plug and play powers that can all sort of interact seamlessly. So if my electrical control creates an electrical field, we'll be able to determine how much damage that can do to the building, which then when it falls on you, we can work out how much damage it does to you from the collapse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say I've taken simulation design about as far as I can take it in a tabletop setting with Ascendant, and still manage to maintain speed of play, which is important to me.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. We should probably move on to the new stuff, but that gives me hope for someone who really wants to be able to tell a variety of superhero stories without having them all feel samey.
Right.
Okay. Speaking of Axe, tell us about your new stuff.
Oh, yeah. All right. So the new book is called By This Axe, the Cyclopedia of Dwarven Civilization. It's a 200-page tome, and it's entirely devoted to dwarves. Now, Adventure Conquer King system is based on BECMI and BX Dungeons and Dragons, and so it uses race as class. So in the original Molde Cook Red Box, dwarf was a character class. What we decided to do when we created Axe was we said that rather than have each race be one character class, each race would have its own unique set of character classes that represented the archetypes of that race. So you have human fighter, human mage, human thief, human cleric. You have dwarf vault guard, dwarf craft priest, elven spell sword, elven enchanter, etc. And so that enabled us to give people a choice of different sort of character classes they might like to play, but it avoided the problem where everyone just picks their race in order to min-max their character class. And so for instance, in 5th edition D&D, make sure your mage is a mountain dwarf so he can get armor or things like that, which I've always detested. And now, contemporary 5th edition has moved in the direction of really de-emphasizing race and treating it more as a cosmetic choice. In By This Axe, we've really doubled down and we've said dwarves are a separate species. They're like fantasy Wookiees. And as such, they have their own physiology, they have their own psychology, they have their own demography, and it's different than human beings. And because it's different, their culture is different in the same way that lions are group hunters and jaguars are individual hunters because their biology is different. So that's let us really do an interesting deep dive into what dwarven civilization might be like. And then having then built out what dwarven civilization is like in the first third of the book, the rest of the book is then game mechanics that bring the civilization to life. Special character classes, rules for dwarven mushroom farming, rules for dwarven beer brewing with special brews, rules for dwarven mining, delving too deep. What happens if you delve into the Underdark and the elemental planes of fire beneath the earth? Dwarven automaton. So what if you want to build steampunk machinery with your dwarf? And that's all in the book. And it creates this kind of fascinating culture, which I think really will resonate with anyone who likes dwarves. And also offer, I think, a lot of new things that people haven't really thought about. Like, oh, I get it now. This is everything I ever wanted to know about dwarves that I didn't even know I needed to know.
That's pretty niche, but it's my niche. DW, what's my favorite fantasy race?
I Gnomes.
It's dwarf.
I think dwarf is a lot of people's favorite fantasy race. I think they're easy to empathize with, right? Like they've got it tough. They have to work hard. The vaults are constantly under siege by the bad guys. They they labor. They create beautiful things. They're kind of grumpy because life is hard. I think your typical middle-aged old school gamer can empathize with that a lot more than with I'm an eternally beautiful elf whose life is perfect and I will never age and my name is Nathaniel Silverly. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna kill you with my battle axe.
This is not a pro elf stream.
So now that said, I like elves too, but for this particular book, we're focusing on dwarves and having a good time with it. I should add all of the fluff, the lore is all written in character. So I created this character called Sorcanius of Cipheron, who's a sage who's been given the first ever opportunity to live among the dwarves as a dwarologist and write up the lore of dwarves. So he's the creator of the field of dwarology, which is to dwarves as anthropology is to humans. And so everything about the dwarves is being written from his point of view. And he's very much written as a kind of as like a cross between Herodotus and a Victorian anthropologist from the British Empire. So he's sort of very snooty about his own way of doing things, but he thinks of himself as like a very objective and rational person who's telling you how it is. And so there's a lot of sections in the book that are very tongue-in-cheek. And it also gives the judge, the game master, a lot of opportunity to decide, in my world, this is not how it is, and Sorcanius was wrong, or he was tricked, or he misunderstood the traditions. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility as a GM to decide how dwarves really are versus how this guy perceived dwarves to be.
Yeah, that's a good middle road. It recalls the old splat books of AD&D Second Edition. They had one dedicated to dwarves, one dedicated to elves, and
Yep.
they didn't do that, and it was very dry, boring, even.
Right. That's right. Yeah. I would say this book is not boring. It's probably the funniest book I've ever written. I always include lots of little dry humor in my rule books. That's easy to miss if you're just kind of skimming them. I think there's a few sections in Circanius that have been laugh out loud funny when people have read them. And what I ended up doing is I made a list of all the tropes of dwarves, and I essentially reverse engineered Dwarven Civilization from the tropes of dwarves. So we know why dwarven women are rare. Why is that? Dwarves are grumpy. Why is that? Et cetera, et cetera. Dwarves have big bellies. Why is that? And then I kind of answered all those questions. So at this point, I'm the world's leading expert in dwarves.
Excellent. We'll get you an honorary degree at Cornell for your dedicated research.
Absolutely, a PhD in dwarology for sure.
Dwarology.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I love that as a concept, not just because I really enjoy the race, but it's like you alluded to before that fantasy races are, like, let's face it, they're just humans in funny suits. And if you go the AD&D Second Edition route and you do a really boring, like, here's the way this funny suit looks and talks and acts, right? Then you're just been given a bunch of a set of acting instructions. So it sounds like you've thought about that, but I'm going to challenge you here since I haven't read the book yet. How does your approach avoid that sort of trap?
Sure. Okay. So the first thing the book says is that like elves, dwarves have a long lifespan. But like humans, they age, and they actually age to elderly age at approximately the same rate as humans, and then they just stay alive. And so a human will spend 5 or 10 years as an old person and pass away. A dwarf spends half his life as a grumpy old person. And so right from the get-go, you have a society that is populated by the elderly. And what do we know always and everywhere about the elderly is they're more traditional, they're less open to change, they're more rigid, etc. Okay, so that's one. Two, For every 3 children born of the dwarves, only 1 is a woman. So there's 2 male dwarves for every female dwarf. And so instantly and immediately, they have a problem. They then have a second problem, which I explained, which is that bearing dwarven children is very taxing on the women, and they need many years between being able to give children. They're not like humans who can have a new child every year to 2 years. So a dwarven woman who spends her whole life doing nothing but reproduction can have at most 4 or 5 children, which makes it very hard for them to repopulate their race if they suffer heavy casualties. And it also means that women are always very scarce, which is why they're rarely seen in the outside world. It also means that you have a lot of dwarven men who have no access to family life, which is why they create warrior brotherhoods and craft guilds and all these fraternal organizations that provide support that they otherwise, lack for lack of opportunities of what we would consider traditional family life. And so just starting from those 3 things, you can immediately see that this society is going to be totally different than human society. It's going to be dominated by older people. It's going to be have a huge number of fraternal organizations for wifeless men. It's going to have different roles for women who are much more precious in their society than they are in our society. So then I also say that the dwarves, unlike humans, don't have direct access to divine magic. They have to get their divine magic through an intermediary of their ancestors. And so unlike humans who can simply, traipse around everywhere and call on the gods, the dwarves need access to the relics and venerable spirits of their ancestors, which focuses them on maintaining the memory of the fallen. It requires them to maintain reliquaries, defend their locations, etc. The fact that they have constant manpower requirements, manpower shortages, explains why they're more industrially developed than the other civilizations. The manpower scarcity is what causes them to be more of a steampunk race than the rest of the world. The fact that they're more physiologically robust is why they're able to have industry when the rest of the world cannot, and why they're able to be better miners, because the methods of mining and industry are exceptionally toxic and pollutant. The equivalent of black lung would kill off humans who try to replicate what the dwarves do, but the dwarves are able to do it. And so I'm able to justify from the basis of who dwarves are as a people, why dwarven civilization is the way it is. And so they're very much not like, oh, ha ha, they're just Scottish dwarves in kilts, blah blah blah. Nor are they, oh, arbitrarily they have technology and that's just because they're dwarves and that's cool. It's very, very, very grounded.
And it's written in a way, and I gather this from the Kickstarter, but this isn't an Axe source book. It's an Axe source book, but it's not an Adventure Conquer King System Axe source book.
I mean, it is and it isn't. It's built using Axe. It's fully compatible with Axe. But what I made sure to do was include a whole section in the rules on how to use it with any other old school game you'd like to use. And anytime there's a mechanic that's unique to Axe that other games don't have, I'll put a little designer's note and say, hey, if you're playing this with old school essentials, here's how you'd want to handle this. So for instance, in Axe, when your character passes away to 0 hit points, you're not dead. Instead, you roll on the mortal wounds table. Well, there's no mortal wounds table in old school essentials. So how should you handle a power that gives your character a reroll on the mortal wounds table? So, so I make sure to explain how to do that, Or there's no cleaves in Labyrinth Lord. So how should you handle a character whose power is he gets extra cleaves? That kind of thing.
Got it. And what are the game systems that you considered?
In terms of compatibility?
Yeah.
I think the ones that are most compatible are the ones that descend from the basic expert framework. So that would be old school essentials, Labyrinth Lord, basic fantasy, and Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I think you could also use it with something like Osric or other AD&D based, but since they don't use race as class, I had to give some explanations of how you would handle that. And what I suggest basically is that you would treat the classes in the game as new classes that are only available to the dwarven race.
Sure, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, you really did your homework as far as that goes.
I tried.
Oh.
I tried. No, I don't think anyone could accuse me of not being meticulous about my game design.
Yeah, I'm starting to pick that up. So how do you? This is great info, and this book is I mean it's right in my wheelhouse, of course, because I love the dwarves. But what brought you here? What made you dig into just the dwarves? Because I don't remember you saying, what was the motivation here?
Oh, sure. So what happened was I have a Patreon where every month I do updates, and I talk to my backers. What would you guys be interested in seeing, etc. And I did an update on dwarven automatons that was very well received. And then a little bit later, I did an update on ancient mining practices, mining and quarrying. And it was really focused on mining as it was practiced by the ancient Romans and Greeks, so historical mining. But my backers were like, hey, man, you should really expand that to get into a little bit of fantasy mining, with rules for dwarves. So then I wrote that. And then a little bit later, someone was like, hey, now that you have mining, you practically could do Dwarf Fortress. You just need mushroom farming rules. Well, I already had farming rules written for Axe for wheat farming and grain farming, and I had livestock rules and pastoralism. So I was like, why not do mushroom farming? So I bought some books on real world mushroom farming and taught myself that. And then I wrote rules for dwarven mushroom farming. And then I all of a sudden looked over all these articles I'd written, and I said, gosh, I could pull these together into a coherent book and make a whole supplement out of it. But I would really need to delve deeply into what motivates it all. Like, why are dwarves this way? And so then I kind of came up with this crazed idea of dwarology, and I invented this character. And I just sort of sat down and started channeling this guy who's who's living among the dwarves, and it turned out to be a really fun exercise. And I kind of fell in love with the concept and made the book.
That does sound like a lot of fun. So I'm gonna point out. I'm gonna remind everybody that this is on Kickstarter. Under Projects Autarch. Is that how you pronounce the company?
Yes, Autarch. Autarch, yeah.
And tell us more about the campaign. Like, what sort of formats are we going to get the book in and everything?
All right, so this campaign is 100% focused on offering a stitch-bound hardcover with offset printing. Everyone has had, everyone's done print on demand, and the quality is never quite as good. So I really wanted to offer a really beautiful book. There's a high-level tier, which not very many people have taken, but we've gotten about 5 or 6, where you can actually get a leather-bound hardback with, made with real leather with gold embossing on the cover. That's going to be a fantastic collector's item for the handful of people who afford it. The vast majority of people are purchasing the stitch-bound hardcover. Once the book has been crowdfunded and released, at that point, I'll also go and I'll add it on Drive-Thru RPG and in both print, in both digital and PDF. But for now, the campaign is all about getting a really nice version of an offset stitch-bound hardcover.
Oh, that's great. Do you offer the Adventure Conquer King system in one of those? Because I've got the print on demand, and the content is great, but it looks like every other print on demand book. You know what I mean?
So unfortunately, the Adventure Conquer King rulebook is out of print. Both the first printing and second printing completely sold out. So at a certain point, I need to do a new printing. I've held off on doing that because I thought, rather than just do another printing, perhaps it would be time to do an Adventure Conqueror King Imperial Edition and add in some of the material that I've created on Patreon and whatnot. It wouldn't really be a second edition in the sense that 5th edition was totally different from 4th edition. It would be more like the difference, more like how Advanced Dungeons and Dragons codified OD&D when OD&D had the Greyhawk, Blackmoor, and Eldritch Wizardry supplements, and it kind of becomes sprawling, and then they codified it all into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That's kind of what I'm thinking I'd like to do. So
GURPS Third Edition Revised, when they added into the main rule book all the stuff they had created for, all of the other specific books that should be universal, really, and meant for all the campaigns.
Yes, exactly. GURPS Third Edition Revised is a really good example. So at some point, I might do that and do a new printing of Acts, but we'll see.
Well, cool. I love that you're committed to producing a real stitch-bound book. That'll be, and never mind the leatherback, just having that would be a treat after the, small stack of print-on-demand books I've gotten recently. Absolutely love it. And I am a big fan of this cover art that you can see a little bit on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. And that's been for of all the authors, gaming and not, of all the authors that I've spoken to, getting art and sourcing it and purchasing it has been one of the biggest challenges for creating these books. So where did you get this wonderful cover, and what kind of art should we expect in this book?
So for about the past 4 years, I've been working with a really talented artist named Michael Sirigos. Michael is very much a reincarnation of Frank Frazetta, and he is just really able to bring these images that are somehow simultaneously hyper-realistic, humans in their ideal anatomy doing heroic deeds, yet at the same time kind of this phantasmagorical, almost like dreamlike air to them at the same time, which is really impressive. And as I said, Frank Frazetta could do that, and not too many other people do. So he did the cover for By This Axe. He did the cover for several of my other books as well: Heroic Fantasy Handbook, Secrets of the Nether City, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And he does. Go ahead.
I would just I don't want to switch the focus away from the dwarf book yet, but I wanted to ask a question about Axe itself. Not By This Axe, but Axe. If we're running out of questions for By This Axe.
Go for it.
Why did you base Axe on BECMI instead of, say, AD&D or Second Edition or OD&D or one of the other,
Yeah,
older
sure. Great
D&Ds?
question. So the honest answer is because when I grew up, I played Redbox Dungeons and Dragons, and then I played Second Edition Dungeons and Dragons, and I never really played First Edition AD&D. And when I thought I had played First Edition AD&D, I actually hadn't. I was actually playing Redbox, and we just really didn't even understand the rules of AD&D First Edition at all, and totally mangled it. So when in 2008 I decided to start my own old school game, I went back to Redbox, and I started with Redbox. And then I added in stuff that I found in the various gazetteers and in the companion set and whatnot. And I started to develop a whole series of house rules. And it just kind of grew into Adventurer, Conqueror, King. Now, I think it was fortuitous because there were certain assumptions that were made in Redbox that were different than the assumptions made in AD&D that ended up really working well for what I was trying to do. And what that is that the game ended at 14th level, and and spells didn't go higher than 6th level. And so characters always stayed human. They never quite became fully superhuman in the way that they did like an 18th level magic user does in AD&D, or a 20th level paladin or something. And that became really important for Axe because there's no point in building an army and an empire if your character can destroy an army or an empire single-handedly. In order for armies and empires and mass combat to matter, the humans still need to be at human scale. They can be powerful, they can be heroic, they can be Achilles, but they can't be Superman. And so by fortuitously stumbling on this sort of 14th level, 1st to 6th level spell system, that made it really much more possible to do this adventurer to king schema that I wanted to create.
I've noticed when looking at your games, and I actually own, I think, all of Axe in PDF. And I haven't had a chance to read as much of it as I would like because, as everyone hears, probably way too much of, I'm deluged with work. I have noticed, though, that there is a lot of details and research that go into your games. And then, I get the same sense from Ascendant when you're talking about the mathematical model and stuff. How much of your work on the games would you say is spent on researching, trade routes and agricultural production on the land and commodities trade and things like that?
Oh gosh, enormous amount. I would say 50% probably of the workload is research, which is why I probably produce games at a slower rate than I otherwise might. I read multiple scholarly papers and books on Roman mining to write the mining rules. I read multiple books on mushroom farming to write the mushroom farming rules. The research I did for Ascendant was really crazy. I've got stacks of physics papers and mathematical equations and spreadsheets and naval ballistics formulas and armor thickness formulas and just crazy stuff. And it goes back to my underlying philosophy of game design, which is I want players to be able to experience agency in a world in motion. So in order to experience agency, what you do each time you do it has to make sense. For instance, if let's say Bob and Jim are running up to a chasm to jump across, and when Bob gets to the chasm, the GM says, "Okay, make a dex check," and he makes a dex check, and then Jim runs up, and the GM says, "Okay, make a strength check," and he's like, "Well, why was it a dex check 30 seconds ago?" "Well, because I said so. I'm the GM, and that's my ruling." You can play a game like that, but at that point, Jim can't make rational decisions about what his character ought to do. The world is capricious, it's arbitrary. That's the world of our ancient nightmares, where capricious gods changed reality on a whim, and humans were subject to the whims of fate. For a player to have agency, he needs to be able to make informed choices in the world. And in order to be able to make informed choices, you need to have reliable mechanics. And in order to have reliable mechanics, you need to have a coherent simulation. And the most coherent simulation we know of is the real world, obviously. So I try and pattern as much as I can off the real world.
I'm curious about that process, and maybe we could dedicate a whole show to that. But I understand doing research, but how do you arrive at the research that you look at? And what I mean is, you want to figure out how mining worked back in the Roman Empire, but how do you focus that research? What questions are you trying to answer? Like, do you know ahead of time, okay, I need a mechanic to model X, Y, and Z. Like, I want this result. Like, I want to generate this kind of game structure. Do you begin from that sort of top-down view, or I'm trying to create a mental model of how you actually put that research to use?
So what I do is I usually start with what in the modern day would be called an operational research formula. So it's a formula that tells you the process by which some action occurs and all the variables that affect it. So for instance, let's say you're discussing farming and you need to know how much land does a farmer have, how much land can a farmer cultivate, how much seed does he need, how much seed does he reap based on what he sows, how long does it take him to reap it, what is the price of the wheat that he yields, what is the price of labor that he needs to hire. Okay, so you make a list of these variables, and then I typically just make some estimates early on, and then I go looking in the scholarly literature for data to reinforce or refine or frankly change my estimates. And for a long time, historians didn't really do that kind of thing. They only did political history based on deeds of kings and things like that. But in recent years, let's say the last 50 years, historians have really begun to explore the overlap of archaeology and economic activity of ancient peoples. And so there's an abundance of literature out there. What's fascinating is that no one's really put it together. So you can find scholarly articles on the earnings from glassmaking, and you can find scholarly articles on the Edict of Diocletian, and you can find scholarly articles on the price of ivory. But what you tend not to see is no one has actually made a functioning model academically that takes into account that the Edict of Diocletian is wrong on its ivory and glass prices because of this other findings we found. And so basically what I've been doing with Axe is building a model of ancient economics that's coherent from all this research. And so I now have a full circular flow of the ancient world, down to every family in my fantasy Arn empire. Are they a lumberjack? Are they a goat farmer? Are they a shepherd? Are they an urban laborer? Are they a crafter, etc.? And I have a full model running in Excel, which is really cool. And so I can now build on that. And that took several years to create, but now that I've got it, it's awesome.
I don't have a good word for that, but I understand it. Thanks for the insight into how you actually do your stuff. So obvious question, and maybe to ask it is to answer it, but you said a couple times, and in this description, you are clearly a fully simulationist type of gamer. Is there any point at which you, in the development, where you change the game mechanics from what you believe to be the correct simulation to something that's more gamey, more? Do you ever find yourself in that situation where the simulation doesn't generate interesting play or interesting decisions, so you need to gamify it?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that's really important to understand when you're doing the simulation process is that if you change one variable or ignore one variable, you can think you're creating a simulation and actually you've just created a mess. And I'm going to give an example from Star Wars Galaxies. So in Star Wars Galaxies, when it first launched in Raph Koster's original version of the game, you could be a beast trainer, and you could go out and into Tatooine. You could find a Rancor. You could tame the Rancor and make it your pet. And in the original version of the game, the Rancor then followed you around, and if it got killed, it was dead. And so as a result, having a Rancor was really, really powerful. It was hard to get, and you didn't want it to die. You were very upset if it died. Well, players complain, that's not fun. I don't want to have to, lose my Rancor because I want to go into a cantina. I don't want my Rancor to die from a random encounter. That's not fun. So they changed the game. So now you could press a button to unsummon your Rancor, and he just vanished. And if your Rancor died, rather than be killed, he was just wounded, and you could bring him back later. Well, so then what happened? In their PvP component of the game, where it was AT-ATs and stormtroopers versus heroes and things, in that PvP component of the game, well, all of a sudden Rancors were the most dominant weapon in the galaxy. And of course they were, because you could summon them out of nowhere, and if they died, they came back to life. So like, what would you rather have, an AT-AT or like a Pokemon Rancor that's immortal? Obviously you want the Rancor. And so because they decided not to simulate that aspect of Rancors, their mortality and the difficulty of transporting Rancors around intergalactically, because they decided not to simulate that, then if you accurately present the power of Rancors, then they become too powerful. And so they had to nerf Rancors and make them weaker in PvP. So when you're designing a game with a simulation focus, you have to be really careful that you're simulating the constraints on things as well as the benefits on things. And if you decide some constraints aren't worth simulating, then you do have to weaken the advantages if you want to have a realistic outcome. So for instance, in my game Domains at War, we don't simulate the fatigue of archers getting tired from pulling 100-pound longbows, right? We just don't simulate it. You do not sit down and measure. You have 10,000 archers, and you're just not measuring how tired they are from pulling all of their arrows. So, but because we don't simulate that, then it's like, well, if you allow them to have their rate of fire when fresh for the whole battle, it would be absurd. They would massacre everything, and you have machine guns. So instead, what we do is we just reduce the rate of fire to an average for the whole battle. It's not strictly realistic. We're not fully being simulated, but we have to make that change for the sake of the game. So there's a lot of that goes on in game design. And I think the difference between a good simulational designer and a bad simulational designer is knowing how granular to get with your simulation and then where to abstract when necessary.
Good take. Makes sense.
Okay, we are on the cusp of running out of time.
We have used all of our time wisely. We even got into game design discussion.
Awesome. Awesome.
Daddy Warpig, do you have any last questions?
Not that wouldn't take us to like 20 minutes over time, no.
We'll save it for another day. Alex, your turn. Last thoughts or questions or anything?
I would just say thank you very much for having me on the show. If you've been listening and my philosophy of game design sounds appealing to you, I hope you'll check out my projects. Adventure Conquer King is on Drive-Thru-RPG. Buy This Axe is currently on Kickstarter. If my philosophy of game design sounds terrible to you, then you should disregard everything I said and check out my products anyway. And thank you so much.
Appreciate it. It's been great talking to you. So glad to have you on. And we always love talking RPGs here. We always love talking to creators and game designers. And I hope everybody listening live got a good chance to figure out what you're about, and they go check that out on Kickstarter. Link to the Kickstarter is going to be in the show notes. I'll make sure after the show, I'll make sure that some of your other works are linked in the show notes on YouTube. Special thanks to everybody in chat. We've got a lot of OSR fans, a lot of BroSR fans, lots of really great guys, good questions. And you probably picked up one or two more backers while we were here. But that's it for me today. I hope everybody had a great time because I did. Daddy Warpig?
Yeah, I do want to thank our guests for coming on the show. And I want to thank everybody who listened live and participated in the chat. Remember, folks, you too can listen live. We do this show 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, just about every Saturday. You can catch us on youtube.com/GeekGab. That's youtube.com/GeekGab. We are... Oh, and you can also get us on SoundCloud.com, Google Play Store, and on the iTunes Store. Just do a search for Geek Gab. You can listen to us on the device of your choice on the web or download us to your computer. We are signing out for today, folks, but don't you worry, don't you fret. We will be back.